Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Workplace Safety Review podcast. Today's special guest, Mr. Rod Harvey. Mr. Harvey has over 35 years of technical experience in performing and managing environmental health and safety consulting projects. He has broad experience providing industrial hygiene, indoor air quality, built environment, safety, environmental services to a wide range of clients in both the private and the public sectors. Rod received his bachelor's degree in biology from Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, and his master's degree in environmental engineering from Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, Illinois. He is a certified industrial hygienist, certified safety professional, certified hazardous material manager, and a registered professional engineer in the state of Illinois. Wow, that's a lot, Rod. He's a member of several professional organizations. He has extensive experience with asbestos, including building inspections and abatement designs, exposure assessments involving chemical and physical hazards, and environmental health and safety auditing and training. Rod has given numerous presentations regarding asbestos, silica, and the topic for today, heat stress, hexchrome, and OSHA's medical surveillance requirements. Welcome, Rod. We're so glad to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Hey, Rod, it's Adam here. Before we talk about heat stress, given your background, the biology, can you tell the audience briefly how the heck you wound up in the safety and health world?
Sure. Yeah, like a lot of people in this business, I didn't go into it directly, but I don't think stumbled into it is correct, but kind of came in sideways. When I graduated with my master's degree in 1986, the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act had just been signed, and everybody and their brother was doing asbestos inspections of schools. And that's how I started off for 3 years of nothing but asbestos on the consulting side, and then went to work for a broader environmental health and safety consulting firm, did a lot of engineering. That's when I got my professional engineer's license. And then about 2000, I got certified as an industrial hygienist and began to do a lot more in my work in the field of health and safety, and have progressed through that in the last 22 years.
And as we wanted to talk today, right, about heat stress and your experience with it and OSHA's National Emphasis Program. And as a starting point, can you tell the audience a little bit about your experience working with or consulting clients related to heat stress?
Sure. I've worked on several different heat stress citations from OSHA representing the employers. A couple of those have been with indoor environments in the general industry setting. And then with the United States Postal Service, I've represented them on 7 different citations. 5 of them were bundled from the summer of 2016. And then there were 2 other later ones that are pending in the system right now.
Are you surprised that OSHA launched this National Emphasis Program on heat stress, or did you see this coming down the pike?
Well, I think I saw it coming down the pike. I'm not surprised. I mean, OSHA has actually done a pretty good job in awareness of heat stress for the last 12, 15 years. They've got a lot of great information on their webpage. They've teamed with NIOSH. There's a heat stress app. And so there's a lot of information. I think it's worth noting that they did start a rulemaking process on heat stress at the same time. Of course, that will take several years if it does come to fruition, but I think it's a little interesting to have a national emphasis program for a hazard that there isn't a specific standard for. I don't know if it really adds much to what they've already been doing in terms of awareness.
To be sure. One of the things that Adam and I have talked about quite often in the last year or two regarding this subject matter is, what do you consider heat stress to be? Like, I know what heat is, and there are various levels, right? But what does it mean to have heat stress? And what does the stress mean in that phrase, if you will?
Yeah, I think that both the terms heat stress and heat strain are used you need to define your terms. And heat stress is essentially the overall amount of heat burden on the body, whether that's environmental heat, air temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, or whether it comes from internal heat, from exertional heat. Our muscles do a great job of moving us around, but they're very inefficient machines, and there's a lot of waste heat that they create that then puts additional burden on the body. So heat stress is that overall burden beyond sitting in a comfortable, environment with a shirt and slacks on. And heat strain is the physiological reaction that the body has to the heat stress upon it.
So, Rod, you talk about heat stress and heat strain. Another thing Mike and I have talked about is, do you see a difference between outdoor heat, right, in the construction site? I mean, that's just the sun's beating down on you versus, heat at an indoor facility where the facility or the process generates the heat. I mean, do you see those as different occupational hazards or hazards at all?
Outdoor and indoor are hazards. I do believe they're different. I mean, indoor, generally, you're looking at, a source, whether it's a blast furnace or something else generating that heat as part of the industrial process. It's relatively consistent. The operations around that are relatively consistent. So day in and day out, you know what that heat stress level is going to be. You can use administrative controls and engineering controls and PPE if necessary to mitigate that hazard. And day in and day out, you can do it. You can also introduce the term acclimatization. You can get your workers up to speed on that a little more gradually, maybe doing 2 hours of that the first day of the work and expanding that so that after 5 days, able to do the whole shift. Outdoor heat is variable. It changes every day. And so one of the problems with acclimatization is, come June and you get your first hot spell and the average temperature goes from 80 degrees to 97 degrees for a 5-day stretch, and you're an outdoor worker, you can't really get ready for that. I mean, you can't plan for it, can't get ready for it. And really, the other way to look at it is the outdoor heat from outdoor worker is an inherent hazard. And so how is the employer supposed to address that inherent hazard? And I think that's where, given, all of OSHA's information and awareness deals with mitigating the hazard, but they don't really provide the employer with much guidance on what they should be doing to mitigate that hazard.
Rod, so, this may be more of a commentary question, but I'll try to get a question in here. Outdoor heat. As you're aware, the Supreme Court recently held that Congress did not delegate to OSHA the authority to regulate, if you will, COVID in the workplace. Basically, this can't be an occupational hazard. It's more of a national health crisis, if you will. So when you're talking about outdoor heat, can the same concept be used? Meaning, it is outdoors. It is, various heat stress can happen, but is it really an occupational hazard? Like, COVID not really being an occupational hazard.
I see your point in that, whether you're on the job or not on the job, you're going to be exposed to this outdoor heat as long as you're in the outdoors. And all of us are hopefully getting out of the house on a daily basis. But I look at it more like the noise. And OSHA has a noise standard. It's kind of analogous, but there's some key differences between noise and heat. But OSHA addresses that with noise in the idea that you're going to have noise exposures on the job, but you're going to have noise exposures off the job and as part of your hobbies and things that you do along those lines. And that's something that needs to be looked at by a physician, and it's a pretty normal occasion to challenge the threshold shift and blame it on work. But I do think, just like they recognize noise as an on-the-job hazard, I think it's appropriate to recognize heat as an on-the-job hazard, because your work environment may require you to do exertional work or other activities that can exacerbate that environmental heat that would be strictly job related.
Good point. Another question that we have is, I've been doing OSHA related work for 20 years and I've been in lots of warehouses all over America that don't have air conditioning. With this new NEP and going under the hierarchy of controls, engineering controls starting out, work practices, administrative controls, PPE, do you see OSHA coming out and doing inspections and inspecting employers in places, let's say, the outskirts of Dallas, Texas, in the middle of July? That's a warehouse that is not air conditioned. You think there's a possibility that OSHA might issue citations to that company because they don't have any air conditioning in a huge warehouse, if you will?
The key things that OSHA has put into their training or their awareness is work, rest, and shade. In the last year, with the emphasis program and the other things that they've done, they've added training and acclimatization to that list. So I don't know that they would do that in terms of air conditioning, although I think it would be on a site-by-site basis if there's no other refuge for workers to get to work, rest, or shade that can provide a relief from the heat. So I wouldn't be surprised if they issued a citation. The issue is I don't think in the situation you described that's going to meet the bar of a general duty clause violation if there's no standard. And I don't think you can get to a point where you've got to require employers to have air conditioning in order to give the workers a place of refuge. I think a shaded area with proper ventilation is going to be adequate. Maybe I answered that question both ways, but
yeah, to be sure.
Hey, Rod, now that OSHA has issued the NEP, and I know we've not talked about it, but I know you, like you said, you were involved in some heat-related OSHA litigation. Now that OSHA's issued this NEP, do you think that OSHA will have more success litigating heat stress cases? Or do you think it's going to be same old, same old?
I think in terms of success in litigating, I think it'll be the same old, same old. I don't think they addressed the major issues that the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission has found in their decisions, vacating some of the citations that OSHA has made. Two of those, it's interesting, in the NEP, Appendix C is example language for a citation, for area directors to use in issuing citations. And two things I noticed in there is, one, they still use the term excessive heat as the hazard. Mm-hmm. And the review commission judges have been very clear that excessive heat just does not set a bar. It's not identifiable. It's not quantifiable. And an employer can't be expected to know what excessive heat is without putting something like that on it. And the other thing that they've done in that draft language in Appendix C is it's still included the National Weather Service heat index chart, which again, the judges have been very clear in vacating these, that data there's no scientific basis for some of the information on that chart. And to cite that chart is just doesn't inform the affected community enough to tell them, when there's a hazard and when there isn't, and how they mitigate that hazard.
Rod, for our audience, because I think we all three of us know what you're talking about here with the review commission, but can you briefly tell the audience, and I'm asking you to put your lawyer hat on, that should be our jobs, to tell us what the review commission held in their recent case a few years ago about heat stress and excessive heat?
Sure, and you can correct me where I don't interpret it correctly. The review commission, and about the same time that we were at trial for the Postal Service cases, the 5 bundled citations, the review commission, one of the judges delivered their decision on another case, which was Department of Labor versus Sturgill, which was a roofing company that had a fatality. And the defendants in both cases had very similar arguments, and that was you haven't met the duty of or the bar of a general duty clause violation. One, the main thing being that there has to be an identifiable hazard that is recognized. And I think, I told you that I believe heat is a hazard, but without a standard of OSHA's to go by, I just don't know what an employer is supposed to do about that. And the heat index is just not sufficient. I would argue that wet bulb globe temperature, which is a step up from there, still isn't sufficient in informing employers what they should be doing. And so I think, hopefully when OSHA, if and when they come out with a standard, it'll be more of a performance-based standard where owners have to take or employers have to take certain actions at perhaps 1 or 2 or 3 threshold temperatures or wet bulb globe temperatures. But to try to identify, here's the problem, I think, with what OSHA has done with these cases that have gone to trial before the review commission. There's been an injury, a heat illness, whether it's an injury, a hospitalization, or a fatality.
Right.
They go out and do their inspection. They look at the records. It was a hot day. So, okay, there must have been a violation based on a hazard of heat. In the 5 cases that I was involved with, very clearly, some of those were not heat-related illnesses. Some of them were arguably heat-related. Some of them or may have been heat-related or may not, or the heat may have been an underlying cause with something else related to it. And the idea that there has to be an injury, of course, if that's the case, OSHA is not obligated to prove that the injury was caused by the heat. But I think it sets them up for a challenge that they can't meet to meet that general duty clause violation. So I don't think the NEP does anything to change that. I think until that happens, if they continue to do citations of excessive heat because the heat index is high, you're going to see those vacated. And so the point I wanted to make about the injury coming first, if there's a lack of an injury, so they're out doing their inspections, it's over 80 degrees, the NEP now says, okay, compliance health and safety officer, include heat as part of what you're looking for, even if that's not the reason you're on site doing your inspection. What are they going to do on a 96-degree day? Even though they've mitigated the hazard and nobody's suffering from any heat-related illnesses, are they going to write a citation because it's hot outside?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, because without some kind of evidence of a heat stress or heat strain, I'm not sure how they would prove their case, if you will.
Yeah, and along those lines, part of the obligation under a general duty clause violation is it has to be a serious hazard that is likely to result in illness or death. The problem is we've lumped all of the heat strain or heat illnesses into one group of heat illness. But that includes, heat rash, it includes heat cramps, it includes dehydration. The vast majority of heat-related illnesses associated with the occupational setting are those, and you'd be hard-pressed to call those serious illnesses. As a matter of fact, in the trial we were at, the Department of Labor attorney admitted that, medical expert admitted that, you would call most of these serious, and so there were no serious injuries that occurred. And these are on days when the Postal Service is putting thousands and hundreds of thousands of mail carriers out on the street.
Rod, reading the NEP and some information from OSHA over the years, they claim that one of the reasons why they came up with this NEP is a lot of the data they've been receiving from BLS and injury and illness logs. Do you think that it's possible or it's pretty likely that employers will now take a second look if they're going to label something heat related if you do have an illness in the workplace, meaning, well, it really wasn't heat, it was something else, because it's called no good deed goes unpunished. If OSHA shows up and you've got a couple things on your logs that says heat stress, well, now all of a sudden, it's a recipe for citation. So I wonder if this may be counterintuitive to their goal and employers will under-record, if you will.
I think that's a possibility. I think that may be an unintended consequence of this, to avoid any record that you've got heat-related illnesses. And so it could result in, a nuanced effect of doing your OSHA record keeping and resulting in under-reporting. I think that's a possibility.
Hey, Rod, last question. I know we've talked a lot about, the potential issues with the NEP and OSHA bringing cases, but if you were a safety manager or IH for an employer, and you had employees, whether outdoor or indoor heat, and they were potentially exposed, what advice would you give the company? What would you be telling employers as we enter the hot months, at least on the Northeast, and I guess in Chicago? What would you tell them? What should you do?
Again, it has to do with mitigating that hazard. And I think the way you do that is you have a written program in place. That written program includes training given at the beginning of the summer and the spring during the start of the hot season, and then frequently stand-up talks or benchtop toolbox talks throughout the hot season to keep that awareness. One of the key things with training is the signs and symptoms, heat-related illness. And that's important, not so you can recognize it yourself, but what happens if you're suffering from a heat-related illness, you lose that self-awareness. And so you need to be able to recognize that in coworkers. So that's a very key thing. Changing schedule if you can, working in the different hours. That's not always possible, but if you can. And then I think a key thing is, and we're going to see us moving towards this, is doing biometric monitoring with wearable devices, or even just with thermometers and other devices for stopping work when the body temperature starts to exceed 101 degrees, because that's when you're starting to lose your cooling ability in your body and can shut down your work before heat stroke sets in and address the issue. And I think, but better than temperature, I think heart rate is something that you should look at. 2 different heart rates at the beginning of a break. take the heart rate immediately when the brake starts. And if it's below 110, great. And then take the heart rate again 3 minutes later for your recovery heart rate. And if it's below 90, go back to work. If it's 90 and it's less than 10 beats per minute, less than what it was at the beginning of the rest break, that's fine. But if it's more than 10, that's good. That's a good recovery. Less than 10 beats per minute after 3 minutes of rest means that you should probably be building in more rest cycles. That recovery heartbeat, that's key. And to have a wearable on your arm or on your wrist that can do that and even transmit that data to the central office and they can it can be monitored with a computer. I think that would be the way to go to start preventing some of these heat illnesses.
Hey, Rod, thank you so much for being on the show today about a very timely topic, very interesting topic that I'm sure our audience is going to find very interesting and worthwhile in carrying out their duties as EHS professionals. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Michael and Adam. I appreciate being here and being able to talk about this subject.
You bet. You bet. Stay tuned, everybody, to the next episode of the Workplace Safety Review Podcast. Stay safe out there, America.